Well, I have to just say that I was actually really very impressed with that play. From a heart point of view, I thought it was charming, and I thought it captured, for me, the essence of the feeling of what it means to be a beekeeper. And so I've just put a few slides together. I had the privilege, actually, of reading through the script prior to watching or seeing the play tonight. And I've just put a few slides together, which I think might just help to expand on some of those themes. This is actually something that was, I got this off, I think it was the BBKA website. And yeah, you know, there is a lot in the news at the moment about the doom and gloom around bees, what's happening to the bees, and there are many, many theories about what it could be that's killing them. And as was stated in the play, that CCD, or colony collapse disorder, is primarily, it's an American problem, where the bees simply, it's also called Marie Celeste syndrome, where the bees simply are just gone, disappeared, poof, vanished from what had been previously healthy hives. And there's a lot of research being done into this, and quite frankly at the moment there are no absolute answers. And we've got a few interesting things on this board here. We've got the chemicals that are used now. You know, agriculture uses a lot of pesticides and chemicals in GM crops we've got going on there. Spaceships have been blamed. Pylons, mobile phone masts. We've got God in the corner over there. Acts of God can often be held responsible. And then, interestingly, at the forefront here, there's quite a lot of activity going on, but within that are beekeepers. And actually, that is one of the significant factors in what is happening to the bees. A lot of it is down to beekeeping practices and responsible beekeeping. Varroa. Varroa was also mentioned. Varroa is a mite. It's a hideous thing. If a Varroa mite, well, you can see here on this bee, this is a Varroa mite. Now, if a Varroa mite was scaled up to human size, it would actually be not dissimilar to this. So imagine that on your body, and maybe you've got 3 or 4 of these things sucking your blood. What they do is they suck the lymph of the bee and of the larva. Now, just this month, we had a fascinating talk by one of our members, senior members of the Nottinghamshire Beekeeping Association. And he told us about some research that has been done by a man called Dr. Dennis Anderson. Nobody in our association knew about Dr. Dennis, but apparently he has discovered something really quite, well, transformational in our understanding about what the Varroa mite actually is. It's a creature that has managed to mutate itself very, very quickly from one type of Varroa to something called Varroa destructor. And as this transformation happens, the bees are less resistant to it. So you can have a colony of bees that are resistant to mites, but when this thing evolves, they're no longer resistant to it. And so they succumb. And it's like us, if we've got some kind of bug and we have stress on top of that, then we're more likely to sort of fall foul of whatever illnesses are going around. This thing here, this scrunchy looking little thing, this is a larva of a bee. And what happens is that the Varroa lays its eggs in the developing larva, and by the time that little bee hatches, it's doomed because it's covered in these things and it can infect other bees. And bees are wild creatures, and so they fly around, and drones in particular are able to get into other hives. They drift, it's called drift. If they turn up on the doorstep of another hive and they're kind of looking kind of quite cute, though, just the drones are the boy bees, they'll just go in and they can infect other hives. So Varroa is one of the most serious problems. It is treatable, and it is treatable with this oxalic acid, which is a winter treatment, and it's also treatable with a thymol treatment, which is called Apigard. You can buy it, it's a proprietary brand, you can get it from beekeeping supplies. And it comes in a little foil packet, a bit like, you know, those cat food tins that you just peel back. And you just pop it in the hive, but it has to be done at certain times of year. Now the problem with this is, you think, okay, if these things are available, why is this problem not solved? It's because beekeepers don't use it properly. They don't read the blooming instructions on the packet. And they put it in the hives, they don't take it off when it's meant to be taken off, and so the mites become resistant, basically. So, in the face of such doom and gloom, and all this terrible catastrophe, I like this statement. And this is one of the things that inspired me at the start of my adventure with bees. I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something I can do. What I can do, I should do, and what I should do by the grace of God, I will do. And what that meant to me was, I can keep bees in my garden. At the time, I had no bees, I had no interest in bees, I didn't even know the bees had a problem. And somebody sent me one of these round-robin emails asking me to sign a petition to government to raise more funding into looking into what's happening to the bees. Well, it's dead easy, isn't it? Press a little click thing on your computer, and then you go and have a cup of tea and you forget all about it. But something about this situation stayed with me, and it prompted me to become interested. And so I looked into it, and before I knew it, I'd signed up with our Nottinghamshire Beekeeping Association. And so the question is, what is the future for all this is happening? And we can really do no more than look into crystal balls to find that answer. I was asked, actually, to give a prediction. I was asked to take part. It was an event at Nottingham Contemporary, and it was called Show and Foretell. And the prediction that I came up with was this. And this was in 2010. Nature will always outthink us, but as we are not privy to the intimate workings of its consciousness, we will always be vulnerable to misinterpreting the outcomes. Nature will always serve the greater good, not just the human element. Whether we're able to see that from our very limited perspectives is questionable. But we're not powerless to make a positive contribution through our actions and our own resilience. And a few days after that, a volcano went up in Iceland. I know all the people were stranded on holiday, and so nature outwitted us on that occasion. I can highly recommend, if you're interested in bees and what's happening with bees, these are really good resources. The book A World Without Bees by Alison Benjamin and Brian McCallum. Alison Benjamin actually is a writer for The Guardian newspaper, and she was actually commissioned by The Guardian to investigate what's happening with the bees. And I actually went to a book launch at the Guardian offices very early on in my whole interest in bees, and it really kind of cemented in my commitment to finding out more. And there was a little trailer of film shown, which was from an American film, and it showed the way bees are treated in America and how millions of bees in their hives are put on the backs of lorries and driven hundreds of miles across the country, there and back, to pollinate orchards. And they are really kept in nothing more than slave conditions. Their life is not as we as UK beekeepers would recognise it. They are a commodity, nothing more than a commodity. They have big dollar signs on the hives. And this little trailer, I was told, had been commissioned by one of the UK's supermarket chain. They couldn't tell me who it was, and I realised later the connection was through this film called The Vanishing of the Bees. I don't know if anybody's actually seen this one, but this was part sponsored by the cooperative supermarket, and they have incorporated this into their awareness campaign called Plan B. So if you've not seen this film, it is available on DVD, or I don't know if it's on video, but certainly DVD. The book The Secret Life of Bees it's just a novel, but it actually truly weaves in the magic and the joy of what it actually means to keep bees and to have bees in your life. Something else you can do is you can sponsor a hive through the British Beekeeping Association, and I have brought some leaflets which I think are in the foyer, and I think for the princely sum of something like £30 you can sponsor a hive and you get a huge amount of information. It's fantastic for families or schools or little groups, girl guide groups and things like that, because they can take an interest and they get information throughout the year. And I think at some point you get a jar of honey as well. Practical support. As part of the Nottingham Beekeeping Association, I'm often asked to come and give public talks, like tonight, which I'm always happy to do, because the more you talk about the things that drive your passion, the more likely you are to engage people with that. And so we turn up at various events, and it's amazing who you find interested in your bees. The man with the furry legs was very fascinated. This was a cooperative event, and the very intelligent looking gentleman here, this is my mentor, this is the guy who put up with me clinging to him saying, please teach me about bees, Bob, because I need to know this stuff. And so for a year he had me as his apprentice beekeeper. This is me in my beekeeping garb, and we saw in the play what happens when you don't wear this gear when you're working with bees. And even very experienced beekeepers and people who are very in tune with their bees, if they're going to be doing any work on the hives that is going to be intrusive to the bees, then it's always necessary to wear a veil. And it is all about protection. In the other picture, obviously, I'm not wearing all the gear because I'm not really doing anything with them that's too intrusive, but I spend a lot of time up with my hives in the garden, and bees do get used to you. They get used to who you are, and if you bring a stranger into the garden, well, they don't attack them, but they're certainly curious about them, and you get a slightly different reaction to a friend coming into the garden to have a little peep at them than you do when you go out yourself. But I can while away hours in the morning sitting on a plant pot in my garden just watching those bees coming and going. Well, this is our garden. And in the play, the honeyman was talking about having wild flowers, weeds. Yeah, we like weeds. We don't like neatness, and we don't like hybrid flowers, and we don't like things that are all planted in serried rows. We like wild things, and that's what our garden is like. And so in our garden we have the two hives. One hive is here, and one is here. And so the sun comes up in the east, which is kind of over there in our garden, and first thing it does in the morning is it hits the landing boards of the hives. And there's, you know, if you ask half a dozen beekeepers which way around their hive should face, then you'll probably get 10 different answers. My answer is I like the hives to be facing east. They get the sun first thing in the morning, and it gives them the idea they should be getting up and getting on with the day. Getting some honey made, bringing some pollen in. Make them welcome. This is the old shutter in my garden, I just painted it up and put bees are welcome here just so they got the idea of the fact that they are. It's all very well telling them that they're welcome, but you've actually then got to, you know, walk the walk and talk the talk. These are the different types of bee you'll get in a hive. Within a healthy, happy colony, at full strength, you may have 50 to 60,000 bees. That's a lot of bees. And within each hive, you will have one queen. And the queen is marked by the beekeeper. Often at public demonstrations, particularly children, they ask, is it born that way, with a little coloured mark on its back? Well, no, it's not. Part of the beekeeper's skill is you have to identify the queen, you have to catch the queen, and you have to mark the queen with a special pen. You can't just go using any old Tipp-Ex or marker pen on her. And you can see the shape, this is the queen bee, and you can see the shape of the queen. The body is long, almond shaped. And here, you can just make it out here. But to actually see the queen in amongst that many bees, all scurrying around doing things on the frames, you have to know what you're looking for. And one of the ways you can differentiate the queen if she's not got a mark on her is that she walks funny. She walks like a little spider. She's got different sort of legs. Her body's a little bit longer. Her wings are short. Some beekeepers will clip the wings of a queen because that stops her flying off, so she can't swarm. Again, that's a personal choice. Personally, I quite like my bees to swarm because it's a natural thing. There's an energy behind it. And they don't go far. They only go into the tree or the rhododendron bush, and then we can go after them with a SKEP and catch them. I'll show you that later. Then we've got a worker bee, and I don't know if you can see from back there, but this little worker bee, so I'm going to move around here so I can point to it. The ends of the wings here are really tatty. They're worn out, all frazzed, and that's because they spend so much time flying, the ends of their wings just get worn out, and that's the time when they die. That's the fact of it. Their little wings just wear out. And the little fat one, the cute fat one on this side is the drone, the boy bees. Now in a hive, I think the percentage of boy bees, the drones, is about, I think it's about 5%. And they have no purpose at all other than to mate with the queen or the queens, because they hang out together. They actually go off on little forays, and if there is a young virgin queen in the area who's ready for mating, those boys will find her. And there's places in the air where they kind of colonise in the air. They hang around and they wait because the virgin queen has to mate on the wing. And they can mate with, I think it's up to 12 drones on the wing in a very short space of time. It's a fast process. And that queen is then mated for life. She'll never mate again, but what she does is she keeps all the sperm is macerated within herself. It's all mixed up, and then she just lays eggs on the basis of that for as long as she lives. A queen can live for about 4 years. She's not going to be particularly good by the time she gets to 3-4 years, but she could, in effect, live till about 4. You tend to want a new queen every couple of years because it keeps the colony healthy and happy and virile. This is a swarm of bees that came from one of our own hives, and this is a SKEP. This is a grass basket which was actually handcrafted by my lovely husband Martin down there. We went on a SKEP making course, and that's another thing, you see, very therapeutic. It's all part of the slow process of life to make your own basket to catch your bees in. One of the reasons is that if you just use a cardboard box or a bucket, which of course you can do, the bees find it really hard to cling to the sides. They want something their little legs can grip onto. And so inside a SKEP, that's perfect. If you were caught short and you didn't have sufficient equipment to transfer them into when you got back to your apiary, they could probably live in a SKEP for a few days whilst you nipped down to the spares shop and bought a few bits in and made them a nuke or something. But this is what bees used to be kept in. This is the old-fashioned kind of beehive, and these were kept turned up like a laundry basket, and they build their comb in. There's no frames, the wooden frames that the honeyman was showing before. There's none of those in there. The problem always was that in order to harvest your honey, you had to get the bees out. And the way they got the bees out was by, well, basically they had to be killed over lime fires. And they were smoked out and killed. And so, you know, economics would say that if you had a nice big heavy SKEP full of honey, the ones with the most in are the ones you would kill because you get the better harvest. So you were killing your best bees, and the ones that, so the stocks would get depleted, which is another reason actually why, you know, we have some of the problems we have now. The bee stocks historically have become weaker. So this is the SKEP now being rehoused in a nuke. This little box here, it's called a nuke or nucleus, and there's just 5 frames in there. And so what your intention is to get the queen into that box. So the best thing to do is take the lid off, and you get your SKEP in, you give it a good old shake into the box, hope the queen's gone in, put the lid on, put the SKEP or the remaining bees on the sheet in front of the little hive with the door open, and they all just march in a little line. And this is a helpful friend, a cat, our cat, who's making sure these last bees go in. He works on a waste not, want not basis, our Leo. But actually, the bees don't bother the pets, and the pets don't bother the bees. They're curious, but we've got a dog and cats. People often are worried if they want to keep bees, oh, we've got pets. Well, animals understand the nature of each other. It's us that gets in the way of that. Royal jelly. This was an interesting little point for me because if I could just borrow the pot. Oh, pot of royal jelly. My goodness. This would cost a fortune. You'd have to really like somebody to give them a pot of this. Royal jelly is baby bee food. And these are queen cells with the queen larva in. And if you imagine the size of these are about the size of a small peanut. You know, that comes in the peanut shell. There's one down there. And the way that royal jelly is harvested is by a pipette. And these have to be raised artificially, lots and lots of them. And the worker bees, they create the royal jelly, which is a very, very high nutrient food. And it's only fed to the queen bee, because it's the thing that makes the queen bee grow into the queen as opposed to a worker. Because they all start in the same way. They all start as a fertilised egg, the same thing. And you can artificially raise queens, artificially put them into little cells, and you can get the bees to create royal jelly, but you have to then harvest it with a pipette. It would take a huge amount of pipettes to fill a jar like that. And the other thing is, it tastes like yoghurt, sour yoghurt. I have tasted it from just a queen cell that was damaged, and it isn't sweet. It isn't really, I wouldn't say very edible, and it is used in cosmetics and it is used in hair products and things like that. But to be honest, I'm not sure how the efficacy of that, because for the amount you would get in a commercial product, it's not really going to make a huge amount of difference to the health and well-being of a human, whereas for a baby bee, it's going to be the difference between life and death. So, royal jelly is baby bee food. Okay, the other problem that we sometimes come across is winter. Well, come across winter every year, obviously, but sometimes winters are harder than others. And this was not this winter, the winter before in our garden. So you can see the difference between living conditions in the summer and the winter. If your bees are properly prepared for the winter, and by that, they have to have sufficient food to get them through. They need to have been treated for Varroa at the end of the summer. And we take the trouble to lag ours. You can see around the sides of that, there's a silvery material. It's the stuff you put down the back of radiators. We put a bit of lagging around the back, just to keep them warm. And so when the snow comes, they're safe and snug in there. At full strength, in the summer months, as I said, there's about 50 or 60,000 bees in a hive. In the winter, it's gone down to about 10. A little tiny huddle of bees right in the middle, and their sole purpose is to keep the queen alive and keep the queen happy and healthy. And the queen will continue to lay throughout the winter, but she will lay much more slowly. So she'll go from sort of thousands of eggs a day to just maybe one or two. And the type of bee that comes out of a winter lay is a slightly different type of bee. It has a much longer life because it's not flying. It's just doing maintenance around the hive. It's extraordinary. I don't know how all that stuff actually happens. It's a miracle and a mystery how they work all that out, but they do. This was an interesting exhibit. The Nottingham Contemporary recently had an exhibit of the work of Klaus Weber, who had done a whole thing around bees, and one of the things he had was some canvases of bee poo. And I was invited to come and make comment on this this exhibit, and one of the first things I noticed about it was that if my bees had done those poos, I'd be very worried, because they're not healthy looking things and they're quite streaky, and it's a diarrhea that is brought on by something called nosema, which is a bee disease. And the theory was that, the Klaus Weber's theory was that bees will poo on white things. They choose white things. And so he'd set these canvases up for them. Because if you've ever noticed bee poo on your washing, it's quite noticeable. But actually, the reason why this would be noticed is that when the bees have been in the hive all winter, they don't do a poo in the hive. They don't. They're very clean creatures. And they do what's called a cleansing flight. And the first time they'll do a cleansing flight is when the sun comes out. And that's normally the day that the householder does the washing and puts the washing on the line. So the white sheets go on the line and the bee comes out for a tiddle. It doesn't make any difference. If you put pattern duvets out, it's going to happen anyway. You just don't notice it the same. Responsible beekeeping. This is the way forward. This is my certificate of proficiency. I took the basic beekeeping assessment, and Martin took his as well last year. And I'm proud to say we both passed. But the fact is, you do not have to have a license to keep bees. You don't have to have been on any course to keep bees. You don't have to know anything about bees to keep bees. This is one of the really quite scary things. And so part of what we do at the Beekeeping Association with the public talks is to try to persuade people that if they are going to take the adventure of keeping bees, that they really ought to join an association and learn about them, because it's only fair not only to the bees but to your neighbours as well. Because if you have bees that are troublesome, and you can get bees that follow you. You go to the hive to do some work on them, and as you're walking away, they're just following you. And this is not what you want. You don't want the followers. You want the nice, quiet, calm bees that stay with the hive. And so the way to recognise all that is by learning about them. This was a photograph that was taken by a friend of mine, a beekeeper in Lincolnshire. And she was called out. We get called out to deal with swarms. And she was called out to deal with a swarm that was living in a statue in a garden, well, it was a private garden, but it was open to the public. And when she got there, this is what she found. And I thought this was absolutely beautiful. This is the statue of the Madonna, and her heart is open, and the bees are inside the heart of the Madonna, and that is where the sweetness lies, because that colony had completely filled this statue with comb and honey, and she persuaded the landowner to leave them alone, so she didn't have to catch them, and they as far as I know, they still live in there. And so that to me just kind of epitomises the potential relationship between the humans and the bees. Thank you very much.